Okay, let's get started. Hi everybody, thanks for coming. Thanks for finding us all the way down here, right at the very bottom of the stage. So yeah, well done. Keeps you fit. So hi, my name's Martin Woodward. That's how to get hold of me, martinwoo@microsoft.com, or at Martin Woodward on Twitter if you want to be sending live abuse. That's always good. If all this, I notice most of the room here are already using Team Foundation Server. If you're fascinated by Team Foundation Server and want to learn more, then please do come along to radiotfs.com. That's a podcast me and a few friends do about Team Foundation Server. Yes, we do find something to talk about every single month on TFS. So, anybody here listen to TFS or Radio TFS already? Wow, amazing. There we go. Yeah, we've got one listener. Great. So the stats aren't, it's not exactly .NET Rocks, but there we go. And I've written a couple of books as well for sale in the bookstore, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't make me an expert, it just means I know some clever people. But we're doing a book signing tomorrow lunchtime, if anyone's got anything they want signed. I don't know why, but there we go. I can devalue your books for you so you can't sell them on eBay. Right. I'm a what's called a program manager on the Visual Studio team. It's a bit of an odd job title because they don't really let me program anymore. Most of the coding I do tends to get removed. And manager is kind of a weird title as well because I don't actually manage any people. I manage the program, a very small part of the Visual Studio. Mostly it seems I delete email nowadays, but I guess that's where the manager bit comes from. I live in Northern Ireland, as you can tell. I'm not a local boy. If I do say anything you don't understand, then please do raise your hand, because I say some words very strange. Like, hang on, I'll say defect sometimes, or berg, when I should be saying, I want to say bug, and nobody can understand what on earth I'm saying when I say bug. If I do say that, that means berg, or defect, or whatever you want to call it. But do please raise your hand if I say something a bit strange in my slightly James Bond-like accent. In my head. That's the view from my house. I'm not just put that up to show off. It does rain all the time in Ireland, so we get lots of rainbows. But that's to give you some background because I work on my own in my office. We're a distributed team. I work on my own in my office in Northern Ireland in a field, and just in my house. Microsoft did actually give me a desk in the sales office. It's in Belfast. But there's a reason why I don't work there. That's my view from my desk in my house. That's where they gave me a desk. I just sit just there, just in that corner by that little warship. Anybody here watch Game of Thrones? I know it's a bit of a tangent. Yeah, there you go. That's where Game of Thrones is filmed, believe it or not. So, yeah. And that's called the Titanic Studios, and that's the Titanic Museum. That's because, don't let this worry you. That's where I build Visual Studio, and that's where the Titanic was built. We like to say it was built by Irishmen, driven by an Englishman. Or the other thing we say, it worked on my machine. It was fine when we last touched it. So, anyway. My team are distributed. We actually have half of the TFS team are based in North Carolina, and then the other half are based in Redmond. So, by nature, TFS has always worked really well over a wide area network and over the internet. Mainly because the network connection to this office was designed for about 5 people, and now there's 150 people there. No, only 200 people there. So it really isn't a very good internet and wide area network connection. And so TFS has therefore always worked really, really well because the guys coding it have to suffer through that. And then now we have people all over the United States, in Chicago, Massachusetts. Where else do we have? Philadelphia, I think. I don't know. All those American cities beginning with P sound the same to me. And India, China, all over the world. And so we're a very distributed team, especially my little part of the team. And the Team Foundation Server has always traditionally offered the core services that are part of ALM, to provide your core ALM collaboration features. I should note, TFS helps developers collaborate, so we have to help everybody collaborate. It's not much good if you're only collaborating with yourself and half the other team can't talk to you. That's not a very good collaboration product, if that's the case. So we've always had a very strong cross-platform presence with Team Explorer everywhere, and we've always been very keen on making sure all developers can talk into the Team Foundation server/service. And then TFS provides a core set of functionality. Obviously, the work item tracking stuff, source control, build, deployment, test case management, feedback management, release management you were hearing about today. So we have this, a huge range of facilities provided by a core unified ALM service that TFS provides. So today, we're not going to be talking about most of this apart from source control. Source control is what we're going to be spending most of our time talking about for the rest of today. The title Flexible Version Control probably hopefully gave that away. So that's what we're going to talk about. When we look at source control, here's a question I didn't ask. Who's using TFS 2010 or earlier? Raise your hands, please. Okay. Who's on TFS 2012? That's a fair few. Well done. Okay, cool. Who's on update 2? Oh, well done. There we go. Right. So up until TFS 2012, the only kind of source control provided by TFS was a traditional check-in, check-out model. So when you get files locally, they're all read-only in the local file system. And then you have to talk to the server. You have to explicitly say check out before you can start editing a file. Now, Visual Studio and Eclipse make that really easy for you by, as soon as you start typing, it does a checkout on your behalf. But if you're editing files outside of Visual Studio, you have to remember to check the file out first and then edit it. And, well, actually, normally what you do is you start editing in Notepad, hit save, get an error, go, check the file out, if you remember, and then off you go. Now, these types of source control systems scale really well. Inside Microsoft, like the Visual Studio team, their source code is stored in this type of database. Not surprisingly, considering we built Team Foundation Server for ourselves quite a lot of the time. A lot of the features were based on our own pain. So it scales really well to huge code bases with millions of files, gigabytes of data. When I do a get latest of a brand new branch onto my machine for developing, it's about 2.5 gig. And that's just pulling down the subset of the code I need to work on, and hundreds of thousands of files. The entire database that our internal TFS instance uses is around about 17 terabytes of data, so it's a big boy. It's also really good for managing your permissions in a very granular way. You can control permissions down to the folder and file level. So you can say, only certain people can read this branch, only certain people can even see that this file exists. It's very good at that. And you can even change the permissions because the client talks to the server between every single, before it even starts editing a file. You can give people permissions to read that source code but not edit it. Because when the client says, please check out, the server can say, no. Computer says no. So, it's just great. And then again, because it's very chatty and talks, well, not chatty is probably the wrong word, but because it's talking to the server before it does operations, it's quite easy to see who's working on what file. Has Martin started editing this file yet? Because you have to talk to the server before you can. So it allows it's very easy to tell who's working on what in your team. So that's TFS 2010, basically. We can talk about it like that. And it's good for large code bases, as I say, and very great for auditability. Now, in TFS 2012, we introduced local workspaces. Local workspaces are a default in TFS 2012. Yeah, a lot of people who are using TFS 2012 might not have noticed or might not even be using them if they've upgraded from TFS 2010. So I'm going to show you those in a moment. That uses what's called the edit commit model of version control, where when you get from the server, all the files are now writable locally. With a TFS local workspace, there is no explicit checkout. You don't talk to the server before you start editing the file. You just edit the file. And then at check-in time, we compare all of the files on your local disk with a copy of all of the files that you last downloaded from TFS. And we use that to figure out which files you've changed. And then we talk to the server and we say, hey, TFS, these files have changed. Can we check them in? Now, that's great because it means you don't have to check out anymore. The downside of it is, and it's great so you don't have to talk to the server between editing, so offline support's a lot better. And it makes it really easy to edit files in Notepad, edit files in Sublime Text, or whatever your favorite text editor is. It makes it super easy. The downside of it, though, is it does have to scan the entire copy of your local the files you have downloaded to disk. It looks at all those files to determine which files you've changed. So if you have, like we have, hundreds of thousands of files in gigabytes of source code, then, well, yeah, several hundred thousands of files, it doesn't scale very well. And it depends how fast your hard disk is. If you've got an SSD, then 100,000 files is actually fine. Above then, you might want to consider going to a server workspace. If you've got a 5400 RPM laptop, spinning Rust drive, then you probably don't want to be going over, say, 10, 20,000 files locally. And it's a nice, linear performance hit that it takes to scan the file system, so it degrades gracefully. Good news is, though, you can swap easily between local and server workspaces, which I'll show you. And this gives, you reduce the amount of auditability you have, reduce the amount of information you get about what people are doing, but what you get in return is less friction. Okay? You don't have to check out a file before editing it. So that's why people like local workspaces, and that's why we introduced them. So let's look at local workspaces for the people that haven't played with them. And interestingly, my laptop just switched off then, probably because I forgot to plug it in, so that's exciting. So wake up. Okay, here we go. Right, woohoo! That was good fun. Okay, so hopefully this will work. Right, here we go. So here we are. And if we go into Visual Studio, and we'll just see, look, one little thing. I kind of cheated a bit, and I'm going to, as this is the, we're not allowed to show, the preview you saw in the keynote this morning, the Visual Studio 2013 preview version. I thought I'd give you all a sneak preview of this. And also, rather than using, we're going to use Git in a minute, rather than using Git in Team Foundation's service in the cloud, I thought we'd actually use it in the on-premise preview version of TFS 2013, just for fun, because as I say, that it's the only way I can show it to you is by standing up here, where nobody can drag me off stage. And it means that you're the first people in the world to see it. So hopefully that's okay. Okay, so here we are looking, and we're connected to a standard my Fabricam Fiber project. And then if I go into my pending changes, I can see this is a Team Foundation version control. And if I go to Manage Workspaces, I'm going to bring it up here, Edit, and we can see, go to Advanced. It's very easy. I don't know why anyone has any trouble finding the difference between a local and a server workspace. Currently, you can see it's a server workspace. And if I go to the desktop and I actually have a quick look at those files, so Fabricam Fiber, main, sample, let's just go into here. Let's have a look. Program.cs, properties. We can see currently it's set to read-only because I haven't checked the file out yet. Now, if I go in and I turn this workspace into a local workspace, I just flip that toggle there. I notice with TFS, you've got other things. You tell it which folders from the server you want local. So I've told it basically I want everything. And I'll say, but as a local workspace, please. Hit OK. And that's now converted my server workspace into a local workspace. And notice it had given me a little hint here to tell me I could do this, because we found people weren't converting them. So we put some little friendly help there to make you remind people. So now if we go in and we look at properties, we can see now program.cs isn't read-only anymore. So that's cool. So if I wanted to, I could, I could do the normal thing you do in Visual Studio, just edit the file, and everybody's seen that because everybody here is using TFS already. But if there you go, so I can just open it and do some stuff with it. If I actually come in and let's edit this in Notepad, with Notepad. So here we go. So this is an outside editor, and this is magic. So here we go. Here's my file. Here's my pending changes view. And if I come here and I actually do, add a comment. Admittedly, C# isn't something you would normally edit in Notepad. Normally it's something like a web config. But anyway, I hit save. Look, it magically appears here in my included changes. Let's do that again. Let's delete that line. Hit save. Look, it's detected. It's no longer different, and so it's no longer in my included changes. So that's what local workspaces give you, a friction-free way of editing. Edit from Notepad, which is cool. And, yeah. And then, there's a few things we did while we were doing local workspaces. For example, let's just close that. Tell you what, let's undo this, undo. When you do undo, it actually doesn't need to talk to the server either, so you can do undo while offline. And then if I come in here, anybody had the problem where somebody on your team says, I've lost my code. I deleted it locally, or it magically disappeared locally, somehow magic. Maybe they drag-dropped it into the recycle bin or whatever. And now they do a get latest with TFS, and TFS says, all your files are up to date. And the files are still not there on your local disk. Yeah, and panic ensues. That's the server workspace, because with a server workspace, you have to tell the server every time you do something locally. So if you delete files locally, TFS doesn't know you have, and so when you tell TFS, give me the latest, it goes, well, you've already got the latest, because you never told me you were deleting them. Local workspaces don't have this problem, so if I just do a delete there, so I've deleted my entire project by mistake. Again, quite easy to do. Notice it has actually detected that I've deleted it, but let's leave that there. And if I come back into to Source Control Explorer, using the shiny new Team Explorer view we have, and I just right-click and do Get Latest Version, then, ta-da-da, he says, woo, there we go, Hello World's back. Yay, so there we go. That's worth switching to local workspaces for alone, probably. There we are, fantastic. Right. And finally, if I jump into web version control, so this is for people who aren't on Update 2, this will look very shiny. This is the whole new web browsing experience for looking at source. This is in the late, TFS 2012 Update 2 has got an experience very similar to this. If I browse around in here, I can actually go look at my files now. I can click on that, do annotate, and see the changes on the files. And if you look, I can actually manage permissions right down to the file and folder level. You see there, I have that little security tab. Notice a little feature you've got here as well, download as zip. So if you just want a quick copy of the main branch, you no longer need to get it to your machine, create a mapping, blah, blah, blah. You can just go to the web, download as zip, and off you go. So they're all new features we've added into TFS since TFS 2012. Right, that's local workspaces, I think. Let me just check. Yeah, that's fine. Oh, and shelf sets is the other thing. Who uses shelf sets today in TFS? Yeah, most of you. It's a great way of just storing some stuff on the server. You can just shelve some code, and it stores a copy of that code on the server, but doesn't check it in. And that's quite often how you would share code between people or machines. And notice, and one thing you can do with shelf sets is you can just leave a comment on them. So if I go into, let's make this a bit bigger. Let's go into program.cs, and I can come in here and say, let's just do that through original name. And then I can reply to that comment, la, 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 la. Okay, there we go. So you can do lightweight code commenting. That was a feature that Brian announced in the keynote this morning. Super. Right. So now, let's jump back. So that's centralized version control. Centralized version control. So I spent a lot of time on these builds. Both of these types of version control are known as centralized. That means that there's a central server, and every time you want to edit the file, check out the file, you have to talk to a single central server. The server stores the history, is the way I like to think about it. So your server is where all your history is stored. And the server is where permissions are controlled. Now, when we were looking at the version control market and what we could do, we realized back in TFS 2005, centralized version control was the only type of version control in town. But in the last couple of years, especially, distributed version control has been gaining in popularity through things like Git and Mercurial. Now, with distributed version control, when you go to your central golden server, and ask for a copy of the code, you actually download a copy of the entire repository. So the way I like to think about it is history comes with code. So your entire repository and all your source and all of its history gets downloaded onto your machine. And that's cool because it means you can do, file history operations, you can do annotate locally, you can do crazy things locally without having to ever talk to the server. It also is cool because it now means that history, for the first time in ever, when it comes to source control, is now portable. So who's been stuck in a version control tool? Not mentioning any names of version control tools that people wish they could migrate from. And the reason they're stuck there is often because they can't take their history with them. Well, with a distributed version control, history comes with your source. So it means basically an end-to-vendor lock-in when it comes to source control, which is a great thing. Permissions, though, are managed at the repository level. You can only control access to files at the entire repository level. You can't control access to files at the individual file level. Because if you think about it, they're getting a copy of the entire repository to their local machine, making changes, and then pushing those changes back to a central server somewhere. So the only time we get to say yay or nay if you can edit a file or if you can view a file is when you get a copy of that repository. Distributed version control is cool because it gives you that full offline experience. You can edit, you can view history, you can do everything you want offline. You can finally code on a plane, which is good. I've done plenty of coding on a plane up until now, but now I can code on a plane with history. And another thing that distributed version control gives us is a much more simplified branching model. Sorry, this is one thing I wanted to mention. When it comes to local workspaces, you see here we actually have branches in the path space. So we have main, and in there we have that sample folder. But then if we go back up, we've got the dev branch, which again has a copy of the sample folder. And under releases, we also have a V1 and a V2 branch, which also contains stuff. So in centralized version control, branching is in what's called path space often, whereas in distributed version control, it's much more normally repository-wide is where branches are stored. And that gives you a simplified branching model. It's much easier to create branches. Still hard to merge. Merge is still painful, but it's much easier to create branches. Distributed version control is great for modular code bases. Remember, it comes with your entire history. So you don't want to check in the entire source code of Visual Studio into a single Git repository because it would be really big. And every time you want to just get a copy of a single file, you have to download the entire repository to your local machine with all of its history. Or you can kind of cut it off halfway through. But you download a copy of the source code with history. They can get very big, use a lot of network. So it's great for smaller, more modular code bases that are actually quite discrete, quite well contained. Well, hey, that's actually probably not a bad design principle when it comes to how you build your software. The more modular you have things, and usually and loosely coupled, usually the better your software is anyway. It's great for working with open source. The vast majority of open source projects today are based on distributed version control now. It's been rapidly changing over the past 2 years. And so if you are using a copy of an open source library internally that you're then building on, being able to do that by pulling the history from the upstream project, having it in your local repository with your changes, and then being able to periodically, again, pull down the latest changes to that open source project, make it really good. And for distributed teams, obviously, it's very, very useful. Hence the name, distributed version control. Now, when we looked at the version control market, we're Microsoft. We're like, hey, we need distributed version control inside TFS. Let's go build distributed version control. Why not? Hey, it sounds easy. We had a look around the market, and obviously, this is why we're here today. Git is the leading DVCS tool. It's one. It's the adoption curve among DVCS tools is huge. It's also, very interestingly, even, say, Mercurial and different not Git distributed version control tools use the Git file formats, fast export, fast import, as a way of interchanging data, interchanging that history. So even if we were to build a distributed source control tool, it would have to compete with Git, and it would have to be able to interchange data with Git, was our first requirement. Okay? And then we also noticed that a lot of people using Git to deploy things. Git's really good at just transferring deltas between versions. And so people like Azure and Heroku, Facebook, whatever, they're all now using Git actually to deploy applications by giving you a Git endpoint, and you just push your changes to that endpoint, and it deploys those things out. It's fascinating. And then the third thing we saw was that Git has great cross-platform support. Git works great on Linux, funnily enough, as Linus Torvalds wrote it. Git works really good on the Mac. The only thing that the Mercurial guys used to say, apart from the command line's a bit nicer, is that the support on Windows for Git wasn't the best, wasn't great. And so, a few of us thought, well, heck, we're Microsoft, crying out loud, If Git doesn't work on Windows and isn't great for Windows developers, well, let's just fix that. Let's just fully integrate Git into Visual Studio and into Team Foundation Server, make it part of that full ALM platform we have in TFS, make it a first-class citizen there, rather than trying to just go do a completely different thing. Let's go do proper Git and make it work in Visual Studio. And more importantly, let's contribute to the open source projects that Git is based on. And I'm proud to say we are doing that. So far, I'm one of the committers on one of the major open source projects in Git, and a few other guys in the team. So what do I mean by fully integrated Git support? Well, again, I spent a lot of time on this build, so I hope you appreciate it. There's Visual Studio in its fancy modern app box, rectangle. No curves in this slide. There's the server or the service. So what we found when we were looking at distributed version control is it's very much a process decision about how you want your team to work. How you work in source control with Git is very different to how you work with source control in traditional centralized TFVC. It's just different. It's a different workflow. And some companies have tried to stick a bridge on top of their centralized tool, which makes it speak Git. Or they've tried to, on top of Git, stick another protocol bridge to make it speak, say, Subversion or some other protocol, make it look like one of the tools. They're always a leaky abstraction. They always fail because the tools are very different. You want to use them differently. If you don't use them differently, then you're using them wrong, and you're not going to be getting the benefits out of the tool. So deciding whether to go for centralized version control, TFVC, or go for Git version control is very much a process decision about your team, how you want your project to run. So you actually make that decision at the team project level. You say you want a TFVC repository, for example, and then that comes with the source control repository and all the other stuff integrated into it in TFS, like issue tracking, test management tracking, builds, blah, blah, blah. Or you can, and then we have Team Explorer up in Visual Studio. We have the source control provider in Visual Studio. That talks through our proprietary .NET object model, which comes in and talks to TFS over a bunch of web services. We have those same web services implemented in Java, and we have a Java API as well as a .NET API. So we have a full fidelity Eclipse client for TFVC, and we have obviously a cross-platform command line client, blah, blah, blah. So that's how TFVC works. That's today. With a Git project, you create a team project, and you say, I'd like Git, please. And then it comes with the same issue tracking, the same build management, everything else the same integrations into version control that you get with TFVC, but now it's Git version control. But it looks very much the same. Now, over on the Team Explorer side, we've actually built a Git source control provider. And then the library that we're using to talk from the source control provider to Git is actually an open source library that we contribute to. As a user of Visual Studio, you don't really care about that. It's just, rather than go build our own way of talking to Git, we decided we wanted to work with the community and actually work on the standard Git implementation when using it in a process, which is this thing called libgit2. And then there's a .NET wrapper. libgit2 is a portable C library. Again, Linus Torvalds code's in here. So you can imagine the conversation I had, when I went to my bosses and was like, hey, it's cool if we ship Linus Torvalds's cross-platform C code in Visual Studio. Like, yeah, sure, go for it. So we've got that inside. We've got libgit 2 which is a .NET wrapper around this library. And that's how Team Explorer talks to Git using this open source library that we've been contributing to for a while now. And we contribute to that library. We have to contribute to their functionality before it can arrive inside Visual Studio. So that's good to know. Now, because it's just a Git library, it talks to any Git repository. It doesn't just talk to, we haven't done like Microsoft Git or anything stupid. It's just talking to Git. So you can talk to a local repository, or indeed you can talk to any third-party remote repository like GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever. You just do. It just works. And then if you want to move code between Git and TFVC projects, you can, and obviously third-party libraries, sorry, they all can talk to Git using the standard Git protocol because it's just Git on the server. So Eclipse works, Xcode works. There's already a great command line client. My Raspberry Pi has a command line client for talking to Git. So it's all there. If you want to move code between the two, we have this Git TF, which is a command line application where you can actually say, hey, this folder or this branch I want to map into this part of the repository and bring history across for me, please. And so you can move code between the two. What we've actually found, we've had this running in the service since January, what we've actually found is most people don't move code between Git and TFVC repositories. They keep the code in those projects. But what they do is they link work items. So they would maybe have a requirement in Project 1 that actually needs something to be done over here, and they just link it over. And so you don't need to do any copying of source or anything like that for tracking of stories across. And so what we quite often find is there might be a big central TFVC project, and then over here there maybe the iOS developer teams actually have their little Git project that they build their iOS application in. And when there's a feature comes in that wants implemented across the board on the website, on the back end, on the iOS app, on the Windows Phone app, on the Android app, then those stories, those requirements all get linked together. And because all of this is in a single SQL database, you have one backup that backs up your backs up all of your code with all the issues, with all the tests, with all the builds, all in one SQL backup. Also, because in the on-premise version, which we've announced is coming, the preview of which is coming around the end of the month, you can actually control access to this using the same Active Directory accounts, the same IDs you use internally can be used as well. It's just TFS with Git in. So the permission management is the same as TFS you know it today. Right, enough talk, let's play. So, as I say, I was here in my Visual Studio. I'm here in Team Explorer. If I go to this new button here, Connect to Team Projects, you just click on that, and this is the new Connect experience. Now we can see I've got a server, TFS 2013, and I've actually got some local Git repositories here. We'll talk about those in a moment. Let me first pick a team project I created earlier that's a Git-based team project. Notice it just looks like any other team project. It's this Fabricam Apps one. So I'm just going to add that to the list. I'm going to hit Connect. And now we can see it arrives, and it's got a little Git icon next to it. So I can just double-click on that. And now it's Visual Studio's talking Git. So if I want to go back to here, go over to here, we see it's pending changes and, TFVC stuff. If I go back to here and go back to there, it flips over, and it's now Gitty stuff, Git stuff. So it's the same interface. And notice you don't get any annoying switching of source control providers, tool options, blah, blah, blah. It just works seamlessly. It just transfers you over. So then let's come in, and we'll actually let's show you the experience when you connect that for the first time. So if I go back to here, and let's just go back to my Fabricam Fiber application. I'm just going to delete that because I was playing with this earlier. We'll remove it, and we'll remove it from disk as well, just for fun. So let's go into repositories, and we'll say Fabricam Apps. Let's just get rid of all those. There we go. blah, 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 blah. See, it's a fair amount of code. So just tidy those up. And what I wanted to show you is the initial Connect experience. Because when you first talk to Team Foundation Server, the first thing you have to do is download a copy of that entire repository. So if I do that, select Team Projects, Fabricam Apps, Connect, and we can see there it is. Once I double-click on it, because I haven't got a copy of that repository yet locally, it's going to ask me to clone the repository. That's generally the first thing you have to do. So you click on Clone, and it says, where do you want to clone? You want to clone this to that. OK, hit the defaults, yeah, whatever, clone. And off it does, and it downloads a copy of that repository locally. So if I now, there you go, it's cloned successfully. If I go to my local machine, there it is. And now I've cloned it. What it actually does, the new Team Explorer, is it browses the repository and sees which solution files are in your repository and makes them really easy to get to. With Git, you'll find that there's a much closer mapping between solution files and repositories. In TFVC, you would typically have lots of solution files, even in a single team project. With Git, you typically find 1 or 2 solutions to a Git repository. That's a much more common way of working because it's much more modular. So here we can say I've actually got 3. I've got my Hello World and I've got some real applications. We're going to play with Hello World just because I'm unadventurous. So let's come in here and we'll open that up just by double-clicking on it, and that's going to open the solution for me. So, and if I go into Solution Explorer, there's my solution. Let's open program.cs, and we can come in here and we can just say, comment from VS, and we can save that. And then we notice we've got a little check mark. It's in Visual Studio. There's a little check mark there telling us that the file's been changed. And so then if we can right-click on the solution or right-click anywhere, say commit. So that's the word in Git for a check-in, commit. So commit to my local repository. Let's say add a comment. And I'm going to hit commit. So I've committed it. Now that change is just local right now. If I come back here and I say, rather than hello world, hello New Orleans, there we go. Save that. Again, notice program.cs is shown up here, and I can say change message, hit commit. So now if I look at my commits locally, we can see I have 2 outgoing commits, 2 changes here that I don't have yet on the server. So if I browse to the server, I can show you that. So again, this is Fabricam Fiber we were looking at. That's TFVC. Let's see the Git version. Notice it all looks the same. It's just Git. I should make this a bit bigger. It's just Git. So you've got all the same stuff. You can browse folders. And if I browse and have a look in that sample folder, have a look at program.cs, we can see the changes aren't there yet on the server. So let's push them. So we'll come here and we can hit push. Or what we can do is we can press this handy sync button. Sync isn't really a Gitism. There isn't a git sync command. We've just added a sync button. That does the same command line operations for people that know Git as git pull and then git push. So we're going to hit sync, or we could hit push if we wanted to. So, and what this pushes the changes to the remote repository, the server. And there we go, and we've successfully synced incoming, outgoing changes. So now if we go back to the server and we go browse down to program.cs, there we go, and there's all the changes. And notice all the same features that we saw over in TFVC in web version control. When we added those for web version control, we add them to both Git and TFVC at exactly the same time. That's how we build the features. So there we are. We can see which changes have done. Now, you can also, from the web, you can come in here and you can switch branches. Remember I mentioned branching in Git is done at the repository-wide level. So when I switch branches, that actually applies to the entire repository. So you can see there in my vnext branch, that sample folder didn't even exist. And it's not here either in my release 1, but it is over here in master. So you see branches are at a repository-wide level, and that's how you branch. Makes it very easy to switch branches. And Git people typically like switching branches. So let's do that. Let's come into Visual Studio, And currently I'm working on the master branch. That's kind of like the Git version of main, you know. So here we are on the master branch, and I'm going to create a new branch. And we'll call it feature A, and we'll hit create branch. And that's going to create a new local branch for me, and then I can come in here and I can actually make some changes. So I'll say, come in here, change in feature A. We'll hit save, and then we'll commit it. So if I go to changes, and we'll say change in feature A, hit commit. So now we notice here in my changes view and in a lot of the views, we have this little branch drop down. You can actually switch branches really, really easily just by going like that, and it flips a branch. Now, people who use Git today without the Visual Studio integration, that's amazing to them, because Visual Studio doesn't go, oh, files have changed out from under me. Oh, would you like to, and especially when you change a project file or a solution file, what do you want me to do? And it gives you this dialog box of about 5 buttons, and I always press the middle one because I'm confused. Well, and then the middle one is usually the right one to press as well, believe it or not. So you can just easily come in and switch branches, and behind the scenes, what it's actually doing is it's unloading the solution in the project, doing the source control change to actually switch branches for you, changing all the files, and then loading it back up again, all behind the scenes, all silently, all making sure it just works. Because Git people like to switch branches, so we wanted to make it really easy to switch branches in Git. Now, I'm just showing you this in Visual Studio now, but Git people today, a lot of the Git people who use Git today, they know about the command line, and they love the command line. Because, to be honest, if you're a Git person today, you have to, because there wasn't any other way of doing it until now. So here we are. I'm in a great project here called PoshGit, which is a PowerShell extension to Git. And we can see we've got all these files here. I'm going to the hello world thing. There we go. There we go. So that's where we were inside of Visual Studio. Now, I want to show you this because this is magic. Right, currently we're on the master branch. If I do git, now the command for switching branches is confusingly in Git world checkout. I know that's confusing, but there we go. We're just going to have to live with that. So git checkout feature A. So what that means is switch to branch feature A for me. I do that, hit return, it switched to feature A. Look at this. It switched to feature A in Visual Studio as well. I go over to here, git checkout main, master, what am I talking about? Yeah, there we go. It switches to master. If I wanted to create a new branch, git checkout minus B, let's do something short, B2, there we go, that'll fit on the line. Create a new branch called B2, creates a new branch and switches to it. And Visual Studio stays in sync with the command line this whole time. There's no need to press refresh, you don't get lost, it just does it. Sweet. Well, what about this then? This is even cleverer. So let's go into notepad readme.txt, and we'll come in. This file is intentionally not left blank, and then rather than saying cheers, we'll say thanks. There we go, that's a bit more American. There we are. Thanks, Martin. And then when I save that, notice Visual Studio has automatically picked up that that file has changed. And if I go to the command line and do git status, Git knows as well that it's changed because it changed. So there we go, modified readme.txt. And even with things like if I do notepad test.txt, would I like to create the file? Yeah. Blah, 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 whatever, add some stuff into it, save it. And as soon as I hit save, you see down, oops, sorry, wrong scrolly bit. You see down here in Visual Studio, it's got it as an untracked file. So I can come in and I can say add, so I add it to my index, add it locally, so it's going to be one of the changes I want to include. Or I could go to the command line and say git add test.txt. So if you've already got a workflow that you're using today that involves Git, and you're jumping out to the command line, or if you're trying to do magic Git stuff that only the command line can do, like Git filter branch, or you're doing some advanced like rebasing operations, Git people do some crazy stuff, and they can do some really powerful things because you've got that entire local repository locally. So things you would never ever consider doing with a repository that was over in the server, because you have to talk over the network every time you want to do something, you can do locally because it's all local. You can still do that from the command line. You can use any other tool that uses Git from the command line, including Eclipse, but including any other IDE, side by side with Visual Studio. Well, that's pretty neat. Let's just let's do that. So we've done those changes, and then we're in branch B2 here. Let's show you this quickly. So we'll say changes in B2. Now, one of the advantages of having a nice graphical tool is that, okay, you can do all this powerful stuff in the command line, but you can make some stuff which you do quite often a lot easier to do in the UI. For example, merging. Who here is using Git? Put your hands up. Who can remember the syntax to merge this branch into the other branch? Yeah, I know. I'm the same, and I use Git all the time. So let's figure it out. So we'll go to branches, and we'll see these are my branches. I want to get the changes from B2 into master. So I'm going to press the merge button, and I'm going to say merge from B2 into master. Hit merge. Ta-da! There we go. Great. And then if I look at my commits, I've got that locally, and I can push that commit back up to the server. Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. We're going to do conflicts later. If that got a clap, you're really going to like conflicts. In fact, let's just do conflicts now, eh? So let's do it because it's while we're here. So let's go back to feature A, and we'll say change in feature A. Let's go back to B2, and it says hello New Orleans. So let's say hello master. Oh no, that's B2. Hang on. Control-Z. Let's go feature. In fact, I'll show you this because this is neat. I'm going to say hello master, and then I'm going to save, and I'm not going to commit it, and I'm going to switch my branch to master, and look, it keeps that change. Isn't that cool? So yeah, it just does the right thing. So let's go back to changes. I'm going to commit that into the master branch, and I'm going to say change in master, hit commit. Right then, so now I can hear you all asking, what happens if you get a conflict, which is it's going to give you? And you still get conflicts the same times you would have got conflicts in the past. Sorry, where am I going? The same time you would have got conflicts in the past, you still get conflicts even in Git, because if you edit the same file in the same place, you need to tell the computer what you want to do. It isn't psychic. It just doesn't know. So you always get merge conflicts. So how do you merge them? So how do you resolve them? So we're going to say merge from feature A into master, hit merge, and it says, you've got some conflicts. Do you want to resolve the conflicts? Now notice, I can still code away here. It's not in my face. It's not, modal dialog box-tastic. We've learned all the lessons we've hopefully learned from doing the TFVC integration into Visual Studio, and we're trying to keep it all so you can keep on working. So we'll say, let's resolve these conflicts. So we hit the resolve button, and again, there's the one conflict we have. I could pick some options, or normally what I do is actually just press the merge button, and look, shiny. Opens up a nice graphical merge tool, and we'll say, hey, I'll have that change, and I'll have that change, and I'll have here, a line in that says change while merging. There we go. So that's what I want the merge to be. I'm going to accept that as my resolve, and then it's going to do the conflict for me. And it's resolved it. Brilliant. So let's go back to changes. No more changes. Resolve. And then I can say changes from feature A. Commit. OK. And then finally, let's go back to my commits, and we'll just make sure we're all up in the server and we've got all the code. Great. So that's all there. So now if I go back over to the server and look at what's on the server version, if we go back into that sample folder, hello world, we can see there is program.cs. We can see there those changes up on the server. Brilliant. Notice, look, syntax highlighting and everything now on the server. Cool. Even with Java code, by the way, syntax highlighting as well. And TypeScript and all sorts of things. So, Git doesn't have a concept of shelf sets. What you do with Git typically is you would, if you wanted to share changes with somebody else on that server, then you would push a branch. You would push a branch up to the server. So where shelf sets is in TFVC, we have the branches tab, which actually allows you to compare branches. So you notice this tells you how many changes you are ahead and behind the branch you're currently looking at. So I can see master branch is where we've been working, but we can see vnext. There are 79 changes that are in master that aren't in vnext, but vnext has 6 changes. So if I click on the vnext branch, it shows me what those 6 changes are. Release notes, anybody? It also, if I click on compare, it'll do a nice inline graphical compare of what exactly changed between those 2 branches, which is a really neat feature, just like with shelf sets. So there we go. So that's how it's very easy to compare branches. Go back to Explorer. And yeah, one of the things I wanted to show you was that this is just Git, you know? There's no smoke and mirrors here. So I mentioned previously, I work on libgit2 and libgit2 sharp. That's an open source project I help with, I contribute to, so I have those locally. I also have gittf, which is an open source project. So that one's on Coplex. Those 2 there are on GitHub. That one's on GitHub. So I could now, let's pull something from Coplex. So, hang on, Phil. One of my friends has got a cool little project on GitHub. He actually works for GitHub. So let's pull down this project, this open source project that he's got. Control-C, and we'll just clone it down into Visual Studio. So we hit clone, Control-V. We want to clone that from GitHub locally. Hit the clone button, and off it goes. Visual Studio will actually go and clone that repository locally, and then I'll have full history. We also integrate into Gravatar now inside Visual Studio. So if you've got a bunch of changes in your, and we'll show you in a second, if you've got a bunch of changes in a repository and there are identities in there which don't belong to your company and you don't have their pictures already stored in TFS, we can get them from Gravatar and show you them. So you still get the nice, you know, images. So there we go. There's the cgit repository cloned locally. And I can go work on that. Let's look at the commits. Oh, no, of course, we've got those. Hang on, let's think what's probably the easiest way. If I go to, yeah, I can look at my master branch here, and I can just come in, view history, and then see all those changes, and it's pulling in. Notice it's pulling in their images, even though I haven't actually, they're not in my local machine. There we go. So that's cloning a repository from GitHub. So it's just Git, is what I was trying to say there. And in fact, it's not just the client that's Git. The server is also just Git, but integrated with TFS. So I'm a bit of a Unix nerd. So let's jump over to Unix. I'm actually running on a Mac here. Hopefully you can you still see this? Yeah, there we go. Oh, that's okay. Right then. So let's just come in and we'll do git pull origin master. That's the handy Git command line syntax. And that's going to talk to the server from the Mac using the standard Git command and actually pull those changes locally. Normally it's a lot faster than this. Oh, there we go. Notice. Even comes with a nice ASCII art to show you that this is Team Foundation server, which is a feature I quite like. So yeah, we can see, there we go, it's added those files. They're the files it's told me that have changed. Brilliant. So I can just come in here and go into sample, ls, hello. And I mean, you know, this isn't that much use to you on the Mac, but if I go into that hello world thing there, vi program.cs, there we go. So I told you I was hardcore. Right, and let's go in. Comment from vi. Yeah, baby. Right, escape. There we go. Git status. Brilliant. Git add program.cs. Git commit -m. Give it a message. And I'm gonna say, because obviously inside Visual Studio we can associate commits with work items really easily. We just do what we do with TFEC. You just drag drop them or associate them, whatever. From the command line on the Mac, how do we associate with a work item? Well, that's super easy. You just use the pound sign. So, oops, fix, pound, he says pound. There you go, 1, 2, 3. This is a British keyboard, so when I say pound, I get a British pound, not one of those. There we go. Fix, hash, 1, 2, 3. I was in Amsterdam last week, so that's why I'm saying pound rather than hash. Fix 1, 2, 3 for from the Mac. There we go. Again, there we go. That's committed that locally. And I'm going to say git push origin master. So I'm going to push to the origin, my origin server, my origin repository, the master branch is what I'm saying there. There you go, let's push it up to the server. So then if I go and let's jump over to Chrome on the Mac, and we go look at the code, and we go browse down to that sample repository again. Again, let's probably make this, I'll make it a bit bigger in a sec. And then we just browse down, program.cs. There we go, comment from Vi. Woohoo, great. Thank you. You go on, you can lab with that. Now, yeah, blah, 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 command line, that's cool for, you know, people with neck beards and everything. But what about people doing, you know, some other development? What about iOS developers? So if I come into here, where am I? PWD. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Okay. So let's just open that folder, and we'll go into agent. Yeah. Let's open this Xcode project. Now, one great advantage of using Git is we now don't have to go build TFVC integration into every single IDE out there in the world, because a lot of them already have Git integration, so we could just use theirs. Apple was one where we really, really wanted TFVC integration inside of Xcode. For some reason, Apple didn't want to let us do that. So they give Apple a great choice. They give you Git or Subversion, and that's it. So let's come in and let's make a change here in Xcode. So I don't pretend to be an iOS expert, so I only trust myself to actually edit comments. So I'm going to save that. But we can see when I do that, notice inside Xcode we get a little modified thing. And then we can do all the same stuff we would do. We can go, you know, file, source control, commit. And I have to say I prefer our Git integration, but there we go. So we'll say change in Xcode, hit commit one file. And then I can take this same code, so I've committed it locally. I can do file, source control, push. And I can push those changes into my remote server, which happens to be, again, a TFVC server. So I'll hit push. So we see from the Mac, from Xcode, talking straight to TFS, fully integrated into TFS using Git, because Git is fully integrated into TFS. Amazing. So let's just show you that. In fact, if I go to commits, we can see there's that change from Xcode there we just did. Notice this handy inline diff view that's new. And I can also go back and look at fix 1, 2, 3 from the Mac, and we see that didn't work. So there we go. Yeah. No, there we go. Yeah, fix 1, 2, 3 from that. So that's linking up to there. Okay. It changes. Yep. Right. Now then, probably the thing I'm actually most proud of this time round is let's just get rid of this. The Git integration, along with the Team Foundation Server integration, is included in every single version of Visual Studio 2013 in the box. So if you download Visual Studio 2013 Desktop Express, or whatever it's called, I'm not sure, the Express version, the free version of Visual Studio, or the Web Express, whatever, it comes with Git and Team Foundation Server integration in the box. Now, the Git stuff's really cool because you don't need a server to be doing source control with Git. I mean, you can get one for free at tfs.visualstudio.com, quick plug. But you don't need a server. You're already doing source control. So if I am, you know, picking up our development tools for the very first time, I go to File, New Project, and we're going to make this even harder to opt out of eventually. And I'm going to say here, and I'm going to say sample code, and I'm going to say add to source control. You say OK, and then it gives you the option. And then let's just go with Git. So now, without having done anything, so let's just do again a classic, you know. Oops. Let's go really American. Hello, y'all. There we are. Perfect. So I know everything. I'm culturally sensitive. I don't need to go on a course. Honest. Commit local. I'm going to commit that locally. And so I'm doing version control. File new project. I'm doing version control now from the beginning with I've not paid anybody for any tooling, and version control's there. That's great for me because the reason I joined Microsoft was to make, not just source control better, but to make software development better. And the more people we can get doing version control, the better. So there we go. I'm very happy. And if you wanted to then take that and push that up to a Git repository, we actually, remember I mentioned about the settings being managed at the repository level? If I go here and look at my repository, that's where I can administer security at the repository level. But I can actually, because Git repositories are more modular, you can actually create multiple repositories. So I can come in here and actually create several repositories underneath my, underneath my team project. And then if I go back to Fabricam, and I'm just going to hit refresh here, and hit this little drop down, I can now switch between repositories really easily inside of the same team project. So there's the sample code repository. Notice it's currently empty, so it gives you a nice handy, what do you need to do with this empty repository thing. What you can just do is go to Visual Studio, and you look at your commits, and it says, you've got commits locally, but you haven't published them. That's bad. You probably want to publish them. So you can hit here and do publish, and that'll actually take your code and push it up to that remote repository. And again, that remote repository doesn't need to be, a TFVC repository. I only say that because you can get them for free at tfs.visualstudio.com. Again, blatant plug. But if you were using somebody else's Git hosting service, then you could do that fine as well. It just works. It's just Git. Brilliant. One more thing I wanted to show you, which you can't, which you haven't seen anywhere else. I don't think this has ever been shown to anybody. So this is quite exciting. Let's hope it works. So we're in Fabricam apps. Yeah. Okay. Let's go over to that. Let's create a build. So let's create a Git build. Remember, we've got all this integrated together. So let's do new build definition, and we're going to say TechEd North America. What kind of trigger do we want? Well, we like continuous integration builds, don't we? So let's do a continuous integration build. Where do you want that code to come from? Well, I like it to come from a Team Foundation Git repository. Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you'd actually like to pull it from from GitHub or from Coplex or somewhere. You could do that if you wanted to. But no, let's pull it from TFS, and then we can get some additional metadata. I want to build the master branch, or maybe I actually want to build every single branch, regardless of what people push. I can then come in here. Where do you want to build? Where do you want to build it on that build server? Where do you want the results? You no longer need to specify a Windows file share to store build output. You can actually put build output onto the server now. So I'm going to pick that option. And what do you want to build? So I'm going to say I would like to build. And again, because I didn't have it open, yeah, let's just build that. That'll do. Okay, great. And then all the usual buildy stuff. So I'm going to hit save. Fingers crossed. Let's hope this works. I'm going to right-click there and do queue new build. And I'm going to queue a build using Git version control and Team Foundation build all inside of here. So let's just click on that and see what happens. And in fact, let's just blow your mind a little more. Let's go over to the Mac and actually watch that .NET build run from the Mac. Crazy. It's cats and dogs living together, isn't it? It really is. There we go, there's it build running. There you go, it's just busy running, blah, 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 doing all the NuGet magic. Great. I'm hoping that's going to work. Right, one more thing I wanted to show you. Remember I said, this is a bit ambitious, so let's see if this works. Remember I said it's all, there we go. Woohoo, it both succeeded. That was great timing. And look, all the unit tests passed. Amazing. There was only one test, so that's why. Okay. Great, that's amazing. Right, okay. As we're on a winning streak, let's go back to that. Yeah, let's do that. Let's go back to the project we had, that sample code solution we had. Let's open that back up again. And we see here we've currently got the probably quite insensitive comment. Let's do something a bit more useful. The library that we use to talk to Git inside Visual Studio is this open source library, libgit2 sharp and libgit2. So if you want to write your own code which talks Git, then you use libgit2, this same open source library that we've already contributed to. So and that means you can redistribute these really easily as well, by the way, because it's just there. So let's come in here and we'll say manage NuGet packages, and we'll just come in and it's proper open source. So the package is already published up in NuGet. By the maintainer who doesn't work for Microsoft, is a guy, null token, libgit2 sharp. Let's install that. So I'm now adding, into my solution a dependency onto libgit2 that it's pulling down. There we go. And then into my program, I'm going to say, now the first thing, the main object you need is a repository object. So just, var repo equals new repository, bracket, and I'm just going to give it the name of the, well, let's pick a repository from my repos folder. Let's be a bit meta, and let's actually point it to the libgit2 sharp repository, which is even more bizarre because I happen to have it locally anyway. There we go. So there we go. Let's point it to there. Repository, it's got me a little handy. Yep, I want to use the one that's in libgit2 sharp. Brilliant. Okay, so it's done my using for me. Okay. So using blah, 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 blah. Obviously, bracket. And then we want to come in and do something with it. So the first thing we want to look at is say, let's go and look at a commit. And so we just, it's not comment, view commit. And we'll just say commit is the object that's, so the libgit2 sharp is, a very .NET friendly wrapper around Git. So you could just go new repository. So we'll say commit from my C equals repository dot. Now in Git, remember the branch I'm on, where I am, the latest kind of thing. That's called head. That's what they call it. So Git, so repo head dot, and then the very latest version of head is the tip. So that's the very latest commit on my head branch. Ooh, that's exciting. I'm hoping that means 10 minutes to go. We'll find out. Okay, so, yep, that. And then we can just output some stuff about that commit. So, in fact, rather than watching me do it, why don't I just, here's one I made earlier. So I'll show you this. Control-C. Control-V, there we go. It's great how that works, isn't it? I used to be a consultant, so I'm quite good at that. Okay, so we can see here, from my commit, show me the author name, show me the message, and then for every object in my commit, actually show me what's there, in my tree, sorry. A commit contains a tree, and then the tree has all the data in it. So I can just hit that, and hit build solution, and then let's just do a quick wait for the build to finish. Build succeeded. Great. There we go. So that's a very short example. There's obviously all of the things we can do in Visual Studio and more, everything in that libgit2 library, which is fully open sourced under an MIT license, you can go do and program against and do lots of funky stuff against in .NET as well. Advantage of doing it open source, I guess. Great. Right. Let's jump back to slides. So let's get in the service. Just again, if I haven't mentioned it already, did you know that it's free? You go to tfs.visual. Who's got an account at tfs.visualstudio.com already? The ones that haven't got your hand up, get an account. It's free, and we actually keep the very latest build of TFS is always running live in the service. So even if you don't use it for day-to-day, everything you're coding for work, just have a play with it and keep up to date with what's actually happening with TFS. Because it's the build that's currently running in the cloud was deployed last Monday, and then we switched on some features this morning. It's the very, very latest bits. It's exactly the same as the build I'm running on my laptop, which is an early copy of the preview build. And we keep it up to date. Every 3 weeks, we deploy the latest bits. So just have a look and go use it. It's got all the features there. The key message I wanted to get out today is that you have choice. You've got choice of whatever workflow you want. You've got choice of the tooling. You've got the choice of development processes. We're all about choice. We're all about open APIs and being able to integrate into Team Foundation Server. Not only that, I showed you there development for iOS applications on the Mac, fully integrated into TFS and having like two-way conversations. A guy in Visual Studio could be commenting about code that somebody over in the Xcode team have written. It's a collaboration platform, across platforms. It just works. And you can pick you can pick whichever source control model works for you. I'm not here saying Git is the source control model for your team. What I'm saying is we have first-class Git support if you want to use Git in your team. Okay, that's the question and answers. If you haven't filled out an eval, there's the little QR code to do your evals. Please do evals, because if I don't get more than 10, then I don't come back, is the honest answer. And we've got some questions. I'll repeat the questions rather than having to run up to my phone. So the question was, does Visual Studio under 2013, can that take advantage of Git? Visual Studio 2012 has a free plugin for it, which we've had since January. If you just go to Extension Manager, type Git, you'll find it. And that's our Git tools for Visual Studio. That's in Visual Studio 2012. Earlier versions than that, you can get plugins for Git that aren't from Microsoft. But the one for 2012 is more or less similar to what you just saw in 2013. And there's a quick follow-up, and then... So the question was, what if you have an existing project and you want to convert it to Git? It's a great question. Think about it. And you probably want to pick a branch in TFVC is about the same level that is the root of your Git repository typically. So you want to look, I'm already a fairly small branches, then maybe it's suitable. And then you use the git tf command line, which is again is another open source project, to actually take your code and create a Git repository, and then you would push that repository up to the server. And then because when you do git tf, you do git tf clone, it's command line, so it's great, and you can say hyphen mentions, and that'll actually stick into the commit comments, the work items that your change sets were linked to. And so then when you push it back up to your TFS server that's also running Git now, all those work item links are connected back up again. So yeah, it's actually quite a good migration story. But think about it. Think about using it and play with Git first and try and get into Git is a different way of working. Yes, sir.
Two quick questions. One is, any time that you're going to add Git K to the Visual Studio experience, and then the second is, I saw several things in that demo that I've not seen in the current tooling. Is the current tooling going to be updated to support the same?
So there's two questions. First one, Git K support. Git K is visualization of Git branches, if you like, and Git repositories. We are looking to add visualization of the DAG, directed acyclic graph, that's in Git. It'll probably be in the web first when we do some visualizations for it, rather than inside Visual Studio. Mainly because inside Visual Studio, if you want Git K today, just run Git K, because it's Git. So, but we are looking at trying to see what we can do to improve on that experience in the web so that everybody can benefit. The second question is, are the Visual Studio 2012 tools going to be updated? Yes, absolutely. Not every feature will be in that's in the Dev 12 stuff, like handling multiple repositories and things. That's a 2013 feature. Sorry. You can still create multiple repositories, and you can clone them just like you clone any other thing, but the Team Explorer isn't clever enough to know. We had to do some very deep changes into Team Explorer to make it clever enough to know that if the repository name isn't the same name as the team project name, then actually it's still connected. So the question of there, and then yeah. You'd want to limit the use of Git. It's actually controlled at the team project level, so when you're creating your team projects is when you decide if you can use Git or not. So just then. And you need to be an admin to create a team project anyway. Yes, sir.
I like the visualization. I was wondering if there is
Can you tag? Tagging is the equivalent of branching. I don't think you can yet, but yes, we will definitely have that. And if you have tagged, branching, it's the same as labels in TFVC. If you have tagged, you can browse to your tags, through the drop-down that have the branches. You can, in the web, you can see tags as well as branches. I should actually check what the build's doing. I haven't checked that. I will do, see if it tags it automatically for you. I don't think we've enabled that yet. I'd have to check. Great question. If you come down to the booth, I'll be down at the booth between 6 and 8 tonight. If you want to come down and have any follow-up questions then, that'd be great. If you want to get hold of me, from now on, I'm going to be down at the booth basically all the time, unless I'm meeting with a customer. So feel free to come join me. It's down in the expo hall. If you go in the D door, just head towards the sort of purple area that's just in front of you. It's a great spot. And come and have a play. or send me an email, martinwoo@microsoft.com, or abuse me on Twitter. And then finally, there's a great session by Peter Provost this afternoon on some of the features inside of Visual Studio, which I would recommend. If you want to know more about ALM in general, then make sure you go catch Brian's foundational session. And then finally, there's a session, DevB 215, this is the end-to-end service in the cloud story. There we go. Thank you very much for your time.